The Council of Muslim Scholars to send missions to Western nations to propagate for moderate Islamic teachings. And dozens killed in eastern Syria in the heaviest airstrike since Russia started its air campaign. Welcome back. Egyptian expatriates have begun voting in the second phase of parliamentary elections. Voters are set to cast their ballots on Saturday and Sunday in 139 polling stations worldwide. The voting process starts at 9 a.m. and ends at 9 p.m. in accordance to each country's local time. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it is following up on the voting process via the operation room set up by the Higher Election Commission. Vote counting will begin at the headquarters of each diplomatic mission on Sunday. In a related development, Minister of Immigration and Egyptians Abroad, Nabila Makram, cited higher voter turnout at diplomatic missions in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, noting that voting is running smoothly. In Jordan, Egyptians are pouring into polling centers in Amman and Aqaba. As diplomats said, the voter turnout has surpassed that of the first phase thus far. Let's go over now to France. We're being joined now by the Egypt's ambassador to France, Mr. Ihab Badawi. Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, let me start off by asking you, obviously, to tell us a little bit more about the preparations that have been taking place in the embassy, and what about the turnout thus far?
I will be telling you that the turnout is much higher than what we witnessed in the first phase. We are in the middle of the first day, and although we've been having windy weather, rainy, windy weather, although and you are well aware of the security challenges you're having here in Paris,
right.
But the turnout by midday is much higher than what we had during the first day of the first phase.
Right. Is the embassy the only polling station available in France to Egyptians?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Could you tell me if the embassy, the Egyptian embassy, is the only polling station available in the whole of France for Egyptians to cast their ballots?
No, I'm afraid the quality of the sound is too bad. I'm not getting what you're saying.
Well, I apologize for that. Mr. Ihab Badawi, Egypt's ambassador to France, I thank you very much for your time. Let's move on. And domestically, the electoral silence is continuing in 13 governorates, where the second phase of parliamentary elections are set to be held on Sunday and Monday. For his part, the Minister of Local Development, Ahmed Zaki Badr, said that preparations for the vote were concluded at all polling centers. He added that he will be following up on the electoral process himself through the operation room set up by the Higher Election Commission, noting that any violations will be dealt with severely. Meanwhile, the armed forces have started deploying at polling stations in the governorates for the second phase of the elections, with 160,000 troops on high alert to secure the polls. The Council of Muslim Scholars has concluded their emergency meeting headed by the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, on the backdrop of the recent terrorist attacks that rocked the French capital. In his keynote speech, Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib said that the world should notice the difference between the core values of Islam and the actions of some extremists. Sheikh al-Tayyib reiterated that there is no connection between terrorism and any other religion, adding that it is biased to condemn Islam for the actions of some people who chant religious slogans while carrying out their vicious attacks. He also urged Western countries not to take any reaction that may harm Muslim nationals. After the meeting, the Secretary General of the Council, Ali Noaimi, said that the gathering has decided to send 16 missions next year to several Western countries. He went on to say that the Council has sent more than 10 missions last year to propagate for moderate Islamic teachings. And let's take another look at the voter turnout and the expatriate voting today. And let's go over now to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Ahmed Abdelalim, State Television correspondent in Riyadh. Thank you very much for joining us, أستاذ أحمد. كيف تصير العملية الانتخابية في الرياض?
Can you tell us about the electoral process in Riyadh?
وكان في مفاجأة غير متوقعة، الإقبال كان أكثر من جيد. القنصلية المصرية في جدة والسفارة المصرية في الرياض الحقيقة استقبلوا العدد الكبير اللي وصل من الناخبين باحتواء مناسب جدا، والعملية كانت منظمة للغاية ومستمرة طبعا لغاية الساعة 9 مساء. بعد العصر حسب التوقيت هنا يعني يبدأ من الآن ابتدت تضاعف الأعداد بحكم أن درجة الحرارة أفضل، وخاصة النهارده السبت يوم عطلة في المملكة العربية السعودية.
I apologize to our viewers. There seems to be a problem, a technical problem. We'll be trying to sort that out and going back to Mr. Ahmed Abdali later on in the program. Now, let's move on with other news that we have for you, and domestically as well. As I just said, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sameh Shoukry, is scheduled to kick off an Asian tour today, which will take him to South Korea and Japan for talks on political and economic relations. Ministry spokesman Ahmed Abu Zaid said that Shoukry's 7-day tour will start with South Korea, where he will meet with officials from several economic institutions, including auto giant Hyundai and electronics company Samsung. The top diplomat is also set to hold talks with a number of senior Korean government officials to discuss bilateral relations. In Japan, Shoukry will meet with officials from the Japanese Agency for International Cooperation and the Bank of Japan. Shoukry's visit is aimed to review the latest developments in Egypt, including the ongoing parliamentary elections, which is the last step in a transition plan announced in July of 2013. Israeli forces have raided and shut down a Palestinian radio station in the West Bank city of El Khalil in the second such case this month. The head of the radio station said Israeli occupation soldiers have entered the offices of El Khalil radio overnight and handed the station a 6-month order to close. The station's Facebook page posted pictures of heavily armed Israeli forces arriving at the offices and of the damage they left behind. It said that the soldiers took computers, and communication equipment and everything. The Israeli occupation army, meanwhile, has arrested 16 Palestinians overnight in El Khalil, with residents saying many of its entrances and exits were closed Saturday morning. The wave of violence, much of which has been focused in and around El Khalil, has left 86 people dead on the Palestinian side, including an Arab Israeli. Meanwhile, at least 36 people were killed in a battery of airstrikes by Russian and Syrian jets on Daesh-controlled Deir ez-Zor province. Russia, which is also stepping up its own air campaign against Daesh, unleashed cruise missiles from warships in the Caspian Sea at targets across Syria for only the second time since it started bombings in September. Here's the story.
At least 36 people were killed in airstrikes by Russian and Syrian jets on Daesh-controlled Deir ez-Zor province. Russia pounded the terrorist group in Syria, firing cruise missiles from warships in the Caspian Sea after Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed retaliation for a bombing that brought down a Russian airliner in Egypt last month. At the United Nations, member states backed a motion calling for action against Daesh a week after 130 people were killed in Paris, the worst such attack on French soil, also claimed by the terrorist group based in Syria and Iraq. The province and most of the provincial capital is held by Daesh militants, with the exception of the military airport and a few areas controlled by the regime. Russia began bombing in Syria in September at the request of its long-standing ally, President Bashar al-Assad, while a U.S.-led coalition is conducting its own air campaign against Daesh. Putin this week pledged to hunt down and punish those behind a bombing that brought down a passenger jet in Egypt last month, killing all 224 people on board in an attack claimed by Daesh. Moscow claimed to have killed more than 600 terrorists after hitting 7 targets in the Raqqa, Idlib and Aleppo provinces. It was the second time that warships have been used since the start of the bombing campaign on September 30th. Putin praised the Russian operation in Syria, its largest foreign intervention outside the former Soviet Union since it occupied Afghanistan in 1979, but said it was still not sufficient to wipe out the terrorists in the country.
Let's try again to bring you the state television correspondent in Riyadh to tell us more about the electoral process there. Ahmed Abdelalim, thank you very much for your time. Ustaz Ahmed.
معك فندم.
كيف تسير العملية الانتخابية في الرياض من فضلك؟
ننسي العملية الانتخابية تسير على أحسن ما يكون. الحقيقة الإقبال فاق التوقع، ولكن تعاملت معها السفارة المصرية في الرياض والقنصلية المصرية في جدة على أفضل ما يكون. تسير العملية بانسيابية شديدة وبهدوء. الناخب لا يأخذ أكثر من دقائق معدودة حتى يتمكن من الإدلاء بصوته.
Again, I apologize. We seem to be having technical difficulties bringing you that phone call. And moving on, and in other news, Russia said that Britain should cooperate with Moscow in any airstrikes it carries out in Syria. A spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry said in an interview that any British action should be coordinated so that the steps are not directed at destroying the statehood of Syria. She cited remarks by the Syrian ambassador in Moscow, who said that countries that coordinate their military actions with Russia are regarded by Syria as coordinating their actions with Syria. Britain has already launched airstrikes against Daesh terrorists in Iraq, but Prime Minister David Cameron wants to follow allies by extending the operation to militant positions